There is a kind of person who will stand at the edge of something beautiful, a sunset, a meal, a moment, and simply watch it, no phone raised, no caption forming in the back of their mind, no impulse to reach outward and say, "Look, this is happening to me." They just let it happen, fully, quietly, and then they carry it home inside them, like something too precious to translate into pixels. The world has a complicated relationship with that kind of person. It calls them private. It calls them mysterious. Sometimes, and this one stings, it calls them strange, as if choosing not to perform your existence for an audience is a symptom of something wrong. As if the decision to keep your life yours, fully and completely yours, is a form of social dysfunction rather than what it actually is. One of the last remaining acts of psychological sovereignty in a world that has quietly, methodically, asked you to give that up. This video is for the person who never really felt the pull to document their days. For the person who left social media and felt immediate relief, but couldn't quite explain it to anyone without sounding like they were making a political statement. For the person who got asked maybe more than once, maybe with that particular edge in someone's voice, "What are you hiding?" As if your privacy was a locked room and they deserved the key. You weren't hiding anything. You were protecting something. There's a difference, and it matters more than most people realize. Let's start where most conversations about this topic are afraid to go. Some people don't share their lives online because something happened. Not a dramatic, single event necessarily, but something, a slow accumulation of moments where the exposure didn't feel worth it. Maybe they shared something genuine once, something real, something that cost them a little vulnerability to post, and the silence that followed was worse than any negative reaction could have been. Because silence has a particular cruelty to it. It doesn't argue with you. It just confirms your deepest fear quietly, without fanfare, that what you feel doesn't land the way you hoped it would. Or maybe the relationship ended, and suddenly scrolling became a form of self-harm they couldn't stop practicing. The highlight reels of people who seemed to be thriving became unbearable, not because they were jealous exactly, but because the gap between the life being presented on screen and the life they were living in private felt like a wound that wouldn't close. Every curated moment someone else posted was a mirror they didn't ask to look into. So they left, and for a long time they didn't have language for why, just that it felt necessary, the way removing your hand from something hot feels necessary. Instinctive, pre-rational, and here's where I want to be careful, because there's a version of this story that gets told in a way that's just a little too flattering, a little too clean. The version where private people are simply more enlightened, more evolved, more psychologically whole than the rest of the population. That narrative is appealing, but it isn't entirely honest. The truth is messier, and the mess is actually where the real understanding lies. Some people retreated from social media wounded. Some retreated strategic. Some never entered in the first place because something in them recognized, even without evidence, that the transaction being proposed didn't work in their favor. All of these are valid. All of these deserve to be held without judgment. The point isn't to rank the reasons. The point is to understand them, because for a lot of people who fall into this category, they've spent years being quietly told that their instincts were wrong, and the relief of discovering that there is deep psychological reasoning behind those instincts is something that can genuinely shift how a person sees themselves. So, let's go there. Let's go into the psychology. There is a study published in the Journal of Consumer Research that found something quietly devastating about the modern experience of being alive. It found that when people anticipated sharing an experience before it happened, they enjoyed the experience measurably less. Not significantly less, not catastrophically less, but less, measurably, consistently. The act of mentally preparing to document something, of beginning to frame it as content even while it's still unfolding, pulls a part of your consciousness out of the moment and places it somewhere else entirely. You are simultaneously living and producing, present and already packaging the past tense version of what you're currently experiencing. What that study describes is something that people who don't share their lives have felt in their bodies for years without having the language for it. That slight flattening, that sense that the moment you're in has already, in some small way, been converted into something less alive than it was a second before you thought about posting it. The memory you form becomes shallower, the emotional imprint it leaves is smaller. You were there, technically, but a fraction of you was already somewhere else, arranging the evidence. Private people stopped paying that cost. Some consciously, some by feel, and they found on the other side of that decision something they hadn't expected, not just quiet, but a different quality of experience altogether. Like switching from a photograph of a forest to actually standing in one, the information is technically the same. The feeling is incomparable, but before we get comfortable in that feeling, I want to sit for a moment in the harder part of the psychology. Because the people who don't share their lives are often carrying something that never gets talked about in these conversations. They are carrying the particular exhaustion of growing up in a culture that treats visibility as virtue. A culture that has, slowly and without announcement, constructed a performance economy, a system in which your value, your relevance, your social worth is quietly indexed to how much of yourself you are willing to put on display. When you opt out of that economy, people get uncomfortable, not always consciously. But there's a friction that appears, a reflexive suspicion that gets aimed at the private person, as though their refusal to perform is itself a kind of aggression. What are they hiding is never a neutral question. It carries an accusation inside it. It suggests that the only reason a person wouldn't share is because what they're keeping back is something wrong. Think about what that does to a child, a teenager, a young person still forming their sense of what it means to exist in the world. If you grew up being told in ways subtle and direct that your preference for interiority was a social deficiency, that your instinct to keep things close was strange or suspect, then you didn't just get a different relationship to social media, you got a different relationship to yourself, a quiet suspicion that the part of you that didn't want to perform was somehow broken. Something to apologize for, something to overcome. The psychological term that becomes important here is private self, consciousness, the tendency to turn attention inward, to examine your own feelings and thoughts rather than monitoring how you're being perceived by others. People who score high in private self, consciousness, aren't disconnected from the world. They're actually, and this is the part that tends to surprise people, more attuned to it. They notice what they actually feel about something rather than what they're supposed to feel. They ask, "What do I think about this?" before they ask, "How does this look to others?" In a culture that has optimized almost everything for outward performance, that orientation can genuinely feel like a defect. You are tuned to a frequency that the world isn't broadcasting on anymore, and so you assume the problem is your receiver. It isn't. The frequency is real. What it picks up is real. What private self-consciousness tends to build, not immediately, not easily, but over time and with enough protection, is a self that doesn't require external confirmation to stay intact. A sense of identity that isn't crowdsourced, and that is genuinely rare, because most people, and I mean this with enormous compassion, not judgment, are running a background process almost constantly. Are people responding to me? Do I seem okay? Does my life look normal from the outside? It's exhausting in a way that's hard to notice because it never fully stops. The private person, whether they arrived there by choice or by necessity or by some wound they're still learning the shape of, dialed that process down. And the quiet that followed, that specific quiet that people who've left social media describe, not the quiet of nothing happening, but the quiet of a background noise you'd forgotten was there, suddenly going silent. That quiet isn't emptiness, it's the sound of your life belonging to you again. But here's what I want you to understand, and this is where things start to get complicated in a way that matters. Choosing not to share your life, or no longer feeling the pull to document it, doesn't mean you've escaped the deeper question. The deeper question is why some people feel that pull so strongly and others don't. Why some people can put their phone down at a dinner table and others physically can't. Why the same moment, the same sunset, the same birthday cake can mean completely different things depending on whether you're experiencing it or producing it. And the answer to that question lives somewhere most people aren't expecting. It lives in what the performing was always trying to do in the first place. Because for a lot of people, the performing was never really about vanity. It wasn't about ego or attention, seeking in the shallow sense that word usually implies. It was about something far more human than that. It was about the need to be witnessed, to exist in someone else's eyes and feel, even briefly, that your life was real, that it counted, that you counted. And when you understand that, when you sit with the genuine ache underneath the posting and the documenting and the story countdowns, you stop being able to judge it. You just feel sad for the version of any person who needed that so badly they stopped being able to experience anything without simultaneously broadcasting it. Because somewhere along the way, the audience became the point, and the life became the content. The person who never felt that pull or who walked away from it didn't escape the need to be witnessed. They just found or were forced to find a different way to meet it, in actual conversation, in eye contact across a dinner table. In the kind of friendship where someone remembers, months later, something small you said about your life because they were genuinely listening and not posing a caption in their mind while you spoke. That kind of witness is slower, it doesn't scale. You can't get it from 8,000 people at once. But it does something the other kind never quite could. It reaches you. Actually reaches you. Not the performed version, not the curated highlight, but the real and ordinary and sometimes embarrassing and quietly beautiful truth of who you are on a Tuesday when nothing is happening and everything still somehow is. If this resonated with something you've carried quietly for years, the feeling that your life is yours, that your moments don't need an audience to be real, you were never behind. You were never broken. You were just already living the answer to a question the rest of the world is only now beginning to ask. You don't have to explain that to anyone, but if someone in your life needs to hear it, pass this along. And if you want to go deeper into the psychology of how we think, feel, and quietly become who we are, stay here. There's more waiting for you.